On industry and technology. Nice to have everybody around the table this afternoon. As per an invitation we had made a little while back, we have joining us today la Ministre Joly avec Monsieur Vincent du ministère.
Minister Joly with Mr. Vincent from the department.
We've been undertaking. Minister Joly and Monsieur Vincent will be here for the first hour, followed by the conclusion of witness testimony that we have for the final meeting of our EV study, which will follow this right after the first hour. With that, Madame la Ministre, la parole à vous, puis on va continuer.
Madam Minister, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you.
It's always been a nation of builders. For 158 years, our auto sector has done more than build cars. It has built communities, livelihoods, and dreams. And behind every vehicle rolling off our assembly lines are Canadian workers with extraordinary skills, with families whose futures are tied to good jobs, and towns that take pride in knowing the world relies on the quality of what we create. And today, that sector faces challenges. But for 158 years, Canada's auto sector has met every challenge with determination and heart. We have stood strong, protecting our people, supporting our families, and ensuring that our community thrives. And that is what makes us who we are. And make no mistake, we're fighting for Canadian workers. This is a defining moment for our country. The question before us is clear. How do we protect what we have built while positioning ourselves to lead in what comes next? And our answer is simple. We are building Canada by standing up for Canadian workers, investing in innovation, and ensuring that the vehicles of the future are designed, engineered, and built right here at home. We're not just preserving a legacy, we're strengthening it for generations to come. Nous croyons en l'ambition.
We believe in ambition. We believe that Canada can attract global investments, strengthen our industrial base, and take the lead on the transition to a stronger and more competitive economy. And above all, we believe that Canada should not settle for reacting to change. It should help shape the change. That's why we launched the Canada's Auto Strategy in January of this year. A strategy which ensures that investments to strengthen supply chains and ensures that Canada remains a global leader in automobile manufacturing.
Strategy. In February, we announced $85 million for 122 projects to install more than 8,000 electric vehicles chargers across Canada through the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program. In March, Premier Ford and I opened the Nexstar battery plant in Windsor, Ontario, a world-class facility that will create up to 2,500 good-paying jobs. In April, we announced $23 million investments to Siemens Canada to scale up its global AI manufacturing technologies research and development center for battery production right here in Oakville, in Canada. This investment will maintain 3,300 jobs in Canada and also create 90 new full-time jobs. And today, Parliamentary Secretary Rochefort has announced a $20 million investment in Electra Battery Materials Corporations to expand the production capacity in its existing refinery in Timiskaming Shores in Ontario to produce battery-grade cobalt sulfate. This facility will be North America's first cobalt sulfate refinery. It will deliver results under our auto strategy by strengthening Canada's critical mineral supply chain and advancing our leadership in electric vehicle battery production. It will create and maintain more than 160 jobs, including 60 full-time jobs for Canadians in Northern Ontario. And together, these investments demonstrate that our auto strategy is not only theory, it is creating real jobs in communities across the country. In this context, we must also be clear about the immediate challenges facing our workers and our communities, particularly those working for General Motors. Following GM's decision in October to end production in Ingersoll, this has created real uncertainty for auto workers and their families. Of course, we welcome GM's recent investment of $691 million in its St. Catharines propulsion plant. This is a positive step for Canada's auto sector. At the same time, our message has been clear. We want to see the Carney assembly in Ingersoll return to full production. We're working closely with the union, with the province and industry partners to ensure a clear path forward to bring production back to Ingersoll. We remain confident in a positive resolution. In the meantime, we will preserve all available options, maintain a firm and principled approach, and continue to engage constructively. And as part of this process, we have initiated a 30-day period under the formal dispute resolution mechanism. L'industrie automobile.
The Canadian automobile industry is a cornerstone of our economy. It supports over 125,000 direct jobs, as well as hundreds of thousands others through the supply chain of large enterprises and SMEs. It contributes nearly $17 billion to our GDP.
Jobs here. Our government will be your strongest partner. But if you make promises and then walk away, you will be held accountable. It's about defending Canada's place as a leader in advanced auto manufacturing, not accepting a race to the bottom. Workers' livelihoods are not bargaining chips for corporate leverage or political games. These are real families with real paychecks and real communities that depend on them. Meanwhile, the process to protect auto workers in Brampton and hold Stellantis to account is underway. This is why we're working with the Government of Ontario and Unifor to defend all these jobs and hold Stellantis to account. To the auto workers across this country, we see you, we hear you, and we are with you. Monsieur le Président, je suis prête à répondre aux questions.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. We'll start with the first round of questions.
The floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you for coming to committee, Minister Joly. You mentioned families, workers, the supports that we need to give them in order for our automotive industry to be successful in the future. This morning, you talked about loans and programs that would help people, businesses who are being impacted by the 232 tariffs. The last 2 weeks here in committee, we had many witnesses from my area, Windsor-Tecumseh Lakeshore, and others from across Ontario, some from Quebec, who talked about the problems that they're having with these tariffs and the impacts on their companies. Their testimony made it very, very clear that the only thing that could help them would be a tariff deal, a good tariff deal with the U.S. I have many quotes here if you'd like to hear them, but they testified, many of them testified that loans wouldn't help them, that the tariffs make them totally unprofitable. If they took the loans, they would just be delaying the problem because they wouldn't be able to pay them back. Can you see in the future any other supports that you can give them?
So thank you, Kathy, for your question. First and foremost, I agree with you that we need to fight for our workers. May they be auto workers, may they be steel workers, aluminum workers, or copper workers. They're all affected by tariffs. And indeed, we're engaging with the U.S. And we will work on having a good deal for Canadians, but we won't just accept any deal. And at the same time, what we believe is there are many things we can't control. We can't control what is going on in the White House, but we can control what we're doing here at home. And so that's why today we announced some new supports, $1.5 billion dollars worth of support. These are indeed loans for the $1 billion by the BDC, but they're interest-free for the first year and very, very low interest rates for year 2 and 3. And at the same time, throughout the 3-year period, only interest will have to be paid. And so it's actually a really good support for companies, and that's for bigger companies because these loans will be between $5 million to $50 million. But at the same time, for the smaller companies, they have the regional development agencies, obviously in your region, FedDev, which is really important. And these loans include up to $1 million of non-repayable contribution, basically supporting even more smaller and medium-sized businesses. So we have to do both. We have to engage with the American administration, and at the same time, we have to work with our Canadian automakers to make sure that they also advance our own interests and Canada's interests in Washington. And at the same time, we need to be able to offer support to Canadian companies that need to be able to adapt and pivot.
Thank you, Minister. So up to $1 million in forgivable loans through FedDev?
And we can provide you all the information in order for you to relay that information also.
Thank you. It's
to your
very new
businesses.
information, so
Yeah,
it was
of course,
hard
of
to
course.
get all the details.
Yeah.
But if you looked at some of our medium-sized companies, our tool and mold, and let's remember that tool and mold is foundational to the auto industry. Some of our companies, which are considered medium-sized companies, would blow through that $1 million in forgivable loans in a month and a half to 2 months. So would you commit to making all of these loans forgivable as you did during the epidemic?
So actually, when you look at what the regional development agencies are proposing, it's actually a similar type of program. And the one that we're proposing for through the BDC is actually very, very favorable terms that was used during the 232 tariffs at the time of the first Trump administration. Mm-hmm. So this has been, and we'll adapt as events occur. But I think this was well received today. I've been receiving a lot of the Steel Association came out saying they were very favorable. Also, regional organizations in Ontario and Quebec as well. The Chamber of Commerce also of Ontario. And I had also different CEOs from small to bigger size businesses.
Thank you, Minister. I've also talked to many of the company owners in my area, and they really honestly don't feel that this is going to benefit them in the short run or the long run. So they're looking for some tariff relief, and they feel it's their only solution.
Well, I think 15 seconds, Minister. I'll afford you the opportunity.
Yes, I think we can work together to explain you the different conditions. That way we can work together to make sure that they are also very well aware, because obviously we need to have the information flow. And I'm convinced that they will be convinced. And at the same time, we're also very open to different options and looking forward to working with you on that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Borelli. Monsieur Natumba, la parole à vous, monsieur.
Mr. Natumba, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Minister. Madam Minister, the impact of American tariffs is being felt in Quebec and across Canada. The aluminum sector and other metals are at the heart of the regional economy, including in my riding. In this context, how can the plan announced today have concrete effects for the regions in Quebec in particular? And how does your department intend to collaborate with the government of Quebec to assess the economic situation in the most affected regions? Answer. When actions are taken by the White House, we react. So today's announcement follows up to a series of measures that were already in place. So we had already created counter tariffs of 25% on steel and aluminum. And we also tightened rules on steel importers who weren't following the rules. We already helped a number of companies through our regional economic development agencies, and we also already had a $5 billion fund to help companies. Now we are adding on to that today, $1.5 billion for affected sectors, steel, aluminum, copper. We are having a conversation for everything tied to forestry and softwood. All that to say that This money is deployed to a BDC for small and medium enterprises, but also for loans that are very favorable of $5 to $50 million. These are essentially interest-free loans for the first year, and in year 2 and 3, the interest is very low. And throughout the term, it's essentially, well, just the interest has to be paid. So in the first year, you have nothing to pay back. And then in the second and third year, very low interest rates. And at the end of the term, there is a repayment is necessary, but in 3 years, we'll be in another world. So we'll see how things look then. But we want to be able to offer companies the ability to predict their operations despite this constantly changing world. And at the same time, the regional economic development agencies will also have funding, particularly in your region. There will be I work with the DEC, and I'm happy to work with you, my colleague. Before I give the floor to my colleague, Sima, I'd like to know how are you spreading out this money across Canada, aside from metals companies? Well, we're working across the country, but the BDC, especially in the urban centers, that's why we're working with the regional economic development agencies like FedDev in Southern Ontario, the DEC in Quebec, ACOA in the Atlantic regions, Prairies Can and Pacific Can and Can Nord, all of the regional economic development agencies. And the distribution of sums will be announced shortly. Thank you.
And thank you very much for your ongoing support to our industries, including Siemens in Oakville. It was also great to see you this morning, where you announced a $1 billion loan program through BDC to steel, aluminum, and copper industries to support our businesses and the tariff disruptions. So as the member of the Ottawa caucus, along with my colleague, MP O'Rourke, we had many opportunities to meet with the industry organizations, unions, and the major OEMs operating in Canada. And what I keep hearing is consistent. They are praising the direction that this government is going, and the repeal of the EV mandate, the return of the purchase incentives, and the investment signals. So they are pretty happy. My riding of Oakville West is home to significant number of auto workers for Ford, Oakville, and automotive suppliers who wake up every morning knowing that what happens at the federal level affect their families directly, so the stakes are high. Recently, GM announced $691 million for St. Catharines, on top of their actually recent investment for $50 million in Oshawa for stamping operations. Statistics Canada reported 47% surge in zero-emission vehicle sales in February alone. Toyota Honda continued to operate and invest in their operations. So, Minister, in a global environment of unprecedented trade pressure and uncertainty, how has this auto strategy managed to hold the confidence of an industry that has so much at stake? And what does its success tell us about where Canada is heading?
So I think there are two phenomena to understand when looking at the auto sector in Canada, but also affecting worldwide. First and foremost, it's really the impacts of tariffs. And in Canada, we're in a trade war. We have 25% tariffs against our auto sector. But because of the rules of origin, basically, the effective tariff is around 12.5%. So that's something that we have to be able to reckon. And the other thing is, there has been a lot of investments made across the world in electrification. Actually, capital is going towards electrification. And there's an entire industrial revolution happening in the auto sector. And for a long, long time, North America was leading these new technologies. And we need to make sure that that continues to be the case. And so that's why our auto strategy has two objectives. First, to support auto production in Canada, but second, also to make sure that we're able to double down on electrification and adopt these new technologies in order to make sure that the plant in your riding in Oakville, which is ongoing an important retooling, is developing the best cars in the world for the world. That we're able to see that in the Honda and Toyota, who just increased actually their production recently, and now they're more than 75% of all the auto production in Canada. The Premier Ford and I were there in Windsor in Mrs. Borelli's riding, opening a new battery plant facility, a Nexstar one. I was in Germany last week or 2 weeks ago, meeting also with Volkswagen, who is opening an important plant in St. Thomas, which will create thousands of jobs. So we need to make sure that we do both. We defend our auto workers and we advocate for them in Washington. But at the same time, we need to be clear-eyed and we need to be able to, we're adopting new technologies that we're seeing across the world.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Sakan. Mr. Saint-Marie, à vous pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Saint-Marie, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Minister, Mr. Deputy Minister, welcome. Two requests for the Deputy Minister, Mr. Vincent. If it's possible, can you please send us the total sums for updated battery streams by province? That would be appreciated. And second, concerning the order in council mentioned around the table, if you can give us the number of SMEs in what sector, in which province are affected by this 25% tariff. The study by the University of Calgary was used, and it targeted 55% of exports from Quebec that were targeted by that. And then on the weekend, Le Devoir published an article that said about a quarter of exports in Quebec are targeted. So if we could get the data on that, that would be very appreciated. If I can respond to that, we'll of course provide you with the numbers. But what I would say as well is that there have been different studies conducted within the government, and we are working also with Statistics Canada. So we will give you what we have for now, but we are still in the assessment of the impact of the tariffs, because it's based on the fact that the businesses affected self-identify. We will provide the numbers. As the minister said, it's important to have specific numbers, but we'll be certain that they're accurate. Thank you. A question concerning the impact of the tariffs. We conducted an emergency study on this, on SMEs and the situations they are experiencing. Often the SMEs are not covered by the 50% tariffs on aluminum parts with the order that entered into effect on April 6th. It's on the entire value, and what that tells us is that at 25%, they're no longer able to export to the United States. And what they all told us, the SMEs and large companies, is that as an assistance measure cannot be a loan because they are already very much in debt after the pandemic and the inflation problems. There are great programs to improve productivity, but the SMEs had to take on debt to purchase new machines that entered into operation, and they did enter into operation, but they can't use them. They can't export to the United States anymore with these new machines. During QP, your colleague, Mr. Leblanc, said it doesn't close the door to this. If we need to do more, we'll do more. Do you share that opinion? Yes, absolutely. We were asked by various organizations, business organizations, chambers of commerce, so on and so forth, to relaunch the response to the tariff program. We broadened it to softwood lumber, forestry, and also to copper. Of course, that still covers aluminum and steel. In that program, we set out our non-reimbursable loans or subsidies for investment in machines for companies. And, companies, what we're trying to help them with is to diminish their dependence on the United States. And that's not an easy thing to do. I know that it's very difficult, and I know that it is a profound change to the business model of many companies, and it will come with risks, but our objective is to help them take on that risk, because we cannot find ourselves dependent on the American market anymore. We need to develop new markets. Our objective is to create a domestic national market through the various provinces as well to increase demand. And at the same time, for larger companies, the program that we are offering through the BDC is similar to the one offered during the pandemic. And so it is a program that was very appreciated at the time, and we are putting it forward because we think that it is the best way to help under the extraordinary circumstances we find ourselves in. For extraordinary circumstances, we require extraordinary measures. Thank you for that answer. Often SMEs export to the United States, and what concerns them is the time that it takes to find contracts in the domestic economy or other places. And so machinists, welders, there's a labor shortage. If they're not paid anymore, they seek work elsewhere and they don't come back. So yes, the program to modernize equipment is excellent for improving productivity, but the urgent thing is in very short term, in the coming weeks and months, just until July. And I'm afraid because I think that they won't make it that far because 60% of their business affairs have fallen off the ledger. I understand, and that's why with the BDC, it's liquidity that's being offered. It's money for businesses. Well, it's from $2 million to $50 million. You're right, but the business must have revenue of $5 million. So that's not a huge company either, if it's a $5 million figure, but it has to be 20% of their revenue must be affected by the tariffs. So we'll look at how things are working. It's the first time we've gone as far as this. Softwood lumber didn't have the same conditions. We are ready to work to give it the same conditions, but you see that the government is taking a step forward in our business response because we know that there are cumulative events, the increased tariffs, new interpretations, and so on and so forth. We worked very hard to create predictability. It's a 3-year loan. For the first year, there's nothing to be reimbursed. After 3 years, there'll be different things happening in the U.S. We'll see what happens. But in the meantime, it helps buy time. But the businesses really need to be able to work to change their dependency on the United States because we can't just wait. Because if that's the case, I think that it's a strategy that's focused on nostalgia, and we cannot afford to rely on nostalgia. Thank you, Mr. Sainte-Marie.
The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being with us today. In September 2024, when you were Foreign Affairs Minister, you imposed a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. You called it an EV surtax order because, and I quote, increasing Chinese EV imports are expected to undermine the growth and development of the Canadian EV industry and other comparable vehicles. That's what you said in the Gazette. And then, of course, as you know, 15 months later, in January 2026, you struck a deal with China to allow 49,000 Chinese EVs into Canada at a much lower tariff rate. So really, I'm reading this and thinking that you've made a deal with China that directly undermines the Canadian auto industry. That's really in your own words, based on your assessment from September 2024. So I'm deeply concerned about this. I'm trying to figure out why you aren't.
Well, things happened since, and the trade war started, and our North American market was disrupted by 25% tariffs. And so in these circumstances, what did we do? We made sure that we were able to get a good deal.
I'll just finish. I'm just not clear how important.
So, colleagues, I'm
not clear how.
This happened last time, so I'm gonna suggest we take the same route, which I think worked. I'm not going to hold the clock against you, Madame Dancho, to allow the minister to reply at a length similar to your question, and the same will be true the other way around. So we don't need to fight the clock here. The purpose is for us to have a thorough discussion. So, Minister, I'll give you about 20 seconds that are reply. And Madame Dancho, I've pressed pause and I won't resume the clock until the minister is finished.
With China in order to make sure that our farmers, including in Mr. Falk and Ted's writing, would be able to continue to export their canola to China, and also our fishers in Atlantic Canada be able to export their produce to China in exchange of a small 2.6% quota of EVs coming from China. And that is similar to the 2023 contingent of cars.
Thank you, Minister. It's actually not small when you compare to how many EVs overall were sold in 2023. It's not small at all. In fact, it represents quite a large percentage of EVs sold in Canada before you put that tariff on them. But you mentioned again that bringing them in would put unwarranted downward pressure on pricing, challenging the profitability of Canadian producers, and reduce choice by crowding out other imports. So again, I'm just not clear how this is good for competition in Canada when you're importing a heavily subsidized car that we can't hope to compete with. How does this help our auto sector?
Well, you know, when you look at it, the cars that have been coming in are mainly Teslas, Polestars made by Volvo, Ford. So that's just a reality because the Western OEMs, so Western car makers, have also joint ventures and have been producing in China as well. And so that's the case across the world. We were able to limit that amount of cars in exchange of support to our farmers and fishers. And at the same time, we've made clear conditions that basically, I'll just finish my sentence, in order for Chinese car companies be able to do joint ventures with Canadian car companies here at home to basically build in Canada.
Again, a year and a half ago, you said in black and white that this was going to undermine our Canadian auto sector. And now here we are, you're bringing in almost 50,000 annually. But I also want to talk about how the Americans recently launched a Section 301 investigation into Canada and other countries over failure to enforce forced labor. I'm sure you're very familiar with the forced labor concerns. It was, in fact, your government that passed a law to stop forced labor. But of course, we've heard from testimony at this committee and others that aluminum, for example, is being used, is using forced labor from the Uyghurs. I'm quite concerned, as I know others are, that this could jeopardize our trade negotiation with the Americans. Are you concerned?
We have applicable laws regarding forced labor. We have an entire regulatory process. We have a private members bill that passed a couple of years ago that is applicable, and we'll follow it.
But again, it seems to be that Uyghurs are being forced. There's forced labor here that are making these automobiles that you're willing importing into Canada. And actually, that was one of the issues you cited 15 months ago of why you didn't want to do this. And I think I'll just quote Margaret McQuigg Johnston, who said that Canadians don't want to be driving cars made by slaves. Would you agree?
Of course.
Then why is it that you're allowing the imports of 49,000 cars that may in part be made by modern slave labor?
First and foremost, what we will do is when it comes to forced labors, we will address that through legislation, period. And my colleague that is in charge of public safety is in charge of the CBSA. And they need to do their job first. Second, when it comes to protecting our auto workers, because I think that's your point, our auto workers are protected in this deal because there are three conditions for any joint ventures with Chinese auto companies. First, labor standards. Second, making sure that we protect our localized supply chain. And at the same time, third, it's the entire security of the software. So we have an entire approach that is very holistic that will be protecting our auto workers while bringing in really good technologies. And at the same time, what we want is affordability. I know that the Conservative Party, as the Liberal Party, as the Bloc Québécois, we're all in favor of affordability. These cars will be affordable.
Thank you. I hope you're right, because as you know, the Americans have threatened a 25% tariff on all goods if they find a country such as ours is importing.
No, I think when it comes to the Americans,
labor,
with your colleague,
we're quite
we don't
concerned
need to
that these actions are going to allow it to get worse. But I'll go to my last question, if I may. Certainly regarding security concerns, I also know you're familiar with this. Electric vehicles, like other vehicles, are able to have a lot of our data, our GPS location. They sync with our phones. Are you comfortable with the Chinese government having access to that information from, say, yourself if you drove one of these?
Well, when it comes to also the security of software, my colleague Minister of Transport is working on a regulatory framework when it comes to protecting people's data in their cars. So I'll make sure that I'll work with him to improve that regulatory framework and also protect Canadians.
That needs to be done
and
before
I think
we brought them
I
in,
just
though.
wanted to answer the question regarding the threats by the Americans to our auto workers. We won't accept them, and we won't be threatened, period.
It's not just our auto workers, it's all of our goods.
Thank you, Madame Dancho. Mr. Baines, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for joining us today here and for all your hard work and navigating during this difficult time of the trade war. My question is around aluminum. As you know, it's very important to British Columbia, my home province, and manufacturing companies. It's a critical input for aerospace, shipbuilding, of course, the drone program that's going to be assembled in Richmond, British Columbia soon, coming up in the next month. Can you expand on how our new Buy Canada policy can support BC aluminum integration, not just for the major projects, but for critical sectors that I mentioned?
Thank you for that. I think we can be extremely proud of the work that is being done by aluminum workers in Kitimat in BC. The Rio Tinto infrastructure is iconic, and I must say is extremely important for the entire west coast of North America. And we've been working, and I've been in close touch with the CEO of Rio Tinto as he's in charge of the Kitimat and Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean investments. And as a Quebecer, I must say I'm, fond of aluminum products because it comes from my province, and I'm happy to know that also we share that in common between Quebec and BC. That being said, indeed, you're right. Our investments in defense will be helpful for the aerospace sector. When I was in your province, I went and went to Cascade, which is an important IMP-owned company that is a key for our country, and particularly Western Canada. And I went also to the D'Avalon facility on Vancouver Island, which is quite something. And we're seeing that actually their book of business is going to be increased because of our investments. We need to land good investments in BC for the defense sector. And I'm convinced that by really increasing the demand for planes made in Canada, we will be able to support even more also our aluminum workers, because we know how much aluminum is key to the aerospace sector. So our Buy Canada policy, like you were mentioning, is going to be at work.
Thank you. And we are seeing some resilience. I know Stats Canada data showed Canada's GDP grew by 0.2% in Q1, led by the manufacturing sector, and it expanded to 1.8%, the largest gain since January 2023. So while we work towards a renewed CUSMA deal, and we had an announcement from today, if you could maybe talk a little bit about that, the support for Canadian manufacturers as they adapt and seek new markets.
Yeah, well, I think I've referred to that a bit earlier in my answers. It was a $1.5 billion announcement, $1 billion for the BDC, $500 for the regional development agencies. Obviously, in your part of the world, in BC, it's Prairie Scan. We will be announcing later this week the allocation for across the sector and across the country. And of course, Prairie Scan and Pacifican will get their fair share. And looking forward to working with my colleague Gregor Robertson, who's in charge of also Pacifican, and yourself, to make sure that we protect the aluminum workers in BC.
I'm just going to shift very quickly to a little bit about the EVs. In my city, we have the largest auto mall, and I've met with car dealers, and they're interested in having some stability in what they can sell, and they're really excited about some of the announcements around the EVs. And 1 in 4 new cars sold worldwide are EVs, and British Columbia is probably one of the leaders with
Absolutely.
EVs, as you know. So why is Canada well positioned to take advantage of this global trend?
Well, because we have the best auto workers in the world. You know, when you look at Honda and Toyota, their plants in Canada are at the same level of predictability as their plants in Japan. And so we can be proud of that. And because they've been extremely productive, actually, Honda and Toyota has decided to invest even more. And at this point, they've increased their production since the beginning of the trade war, and they're more than 75% of our entire auto production. So that's good. At the same time, also, we also believe that we need to invest even more in electrification. We know that we have to increase our grid. That's why we're working on also an electricity strategy. We know also that we need to have more charging stations across the country. We've been working with some players that are in the US and also in Europe to be able to make major investments here in Canada. When I say players, I mean private players, private companies. And of course, we've put in our auto strategy $1.5 billion through the Canada Infrastructure Bank to invest also in EV charging stations. So that's going to be good news also for people in BC that are very fond of EVs.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. Monsieur Saint-Marie, vous encore, 2 minutes.
Mr. Saint-Marie, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Concerning your announcements made this morning, it targets direct exporters. My question is for indirect exporters. During committee meetings, we had discussions, and often it's the service providers to companies that are hit by the 25% tariffs. If they export less, they purchase less from these suppliers. Are there assistant measures for these suppliers? If you don't have the answer now, that's okay, but you can follow up with us. And my second question is the BDC loan program. Is it accessible now? Because the program for the forestry sector was announced in August. All fall, we asked about it, and then it was only made available in December as an emergency fund. The minimum required for companies to have access to the financing will be 20% of their revenue. In the metals-related sector, so copper, steel, and aluminum, they need to have 20% of their revenue associated with that type of operation, and at the same time, the impact of the tariff must be 10%. So those are the two key factors. It's a two-step test. A second thing, what I would say is that we've learned from what happened in the fall. In the fall, we worked with the BDC. We did loan guarantees for banks, and the banks were the ones issuing loans. It was long. It was too long. It was arduous and frustrating. And the collaboration with the banking system is difficult, and that's why we decided to shake things up and work directly with the BDC because it's faster, and the government wanted to be able to offer assistance quickly. So these are not loan guarantees. These are interest-free loans that are very favorable, which will be deployed quickly, and also with the regional economic development agencies, because what saw in the fall was that the program was an irritant, whereas the regional development agencies are very popular, and that's why we redeployed it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Saint-Marie.
The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
And thank you, Minister. It's always good to have you here at committee. I have a few fairly easy questions. Back in February, you indicated that the EV mandate had been paused and that it would be repealed. On what day will it be repealed?
On EV mandates?
Yes.
EV mandates, we said that we were not continuing them, and that's part of the auto strategy. So there's no EV mandates.
There is no EV mandate. Okay, thank you. Good. Then moving on here, at committee here we listened to Margaret McQuaig Johnson, and the question was put to her: it's illegal to import products into Canada made in whole or in part with forced labor, but the staff positions at ESDC and GAC related to forced labor are being wound up. Her response was, I would not trade off the torture and armed surveillance of Uyghurs in Xinjiang for marginal added number of cheap cars in Canada. I think it's therefore up to the government now to reassure Canadians that there will be no EVs entering Canada from China unless they are entirely free of components produced by forced labor. Minister, do you believe that there is forced labor in China?
Listen, that's a question that you should ask the Minister of Foreign Affairs. But at the same time, we've always been clear we would be working with the UN, and the UN Human Rights Commissioner has already stated in a report that there were concerns. So all that to say, what we're looking at actually are cars from China that are being produced by Tesla.
I asked about your
by
opinion,
GM,
Minister.
By
Minister,
Ford,
you were the Minister of
by
Foreign
Volvo.
Affairs.
Yeah.
You're the Minister of Industry. Mm-hmm. Do you believe there is forced labor happening in China?
I've already stated my point of view on that. What I'm telling you now
what is your point of view?
And my point of view is we will always follow what the UN is saying, and the UN was unequivocal. Now, I'm not the Minister of...
You would agree that there is forced labor in China?
I'm not the Minister of Foreign Affairs anymore, and I'm convinced that Minister Anand can answer all your questions. What I can tell you, though, is that Canada will never accept any forms.
You'll be responsible
Canada will never accept any forced labor.
If we can just give the minister a couple of seconds to reply, and we'll go back
and so, since Canada will never accept any form of forced labor, we have a legislation that is about that, and we all voted in favor of it.
From a Liberal member.
From a Liberal member, and we're very proud of it because we don't accept forced labor, period. So that is why we will make sure that the legislation applies. And meanwhile, we will work with those who want to export to Canada to make sure that they apply these conditions, period.
Okay, but Minister, you have been Minister of Foreign Affairs, you're Minister of Industry today. You say you agree with the UN position. And the UN position is that there is forced labor happening, especially among the Uyghur people in China. Are you saying that you would agree with that statement?
Listen, I agree with everything.
Yes or no?
Everything I've said in the past tense. So, now I'm before you as Minister of Industry. And as Minister of Industry, my job is to protect auto workers here. My job is internally focused, and everything that is linked to what is going on in China, my colleagues can answer.
Minister, I'm just asking
and I'm
you
very proud of all the record as Foreign Minister, and I'm very proud of all my record as Industry Minister. But we're in a trade war now, and we need to make sure that we protect our auto workers, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Minister,
and that's
I asked
why
you a simple question. Do you
following
believe
the auto strategy, the support from the sector was great.
Practice happening in China?
I've answered your
That's a
question.
yes or no. It's just a yes or no, Minister.
Continue to answer to
I would like you to answer it, Minister.
To present your question. My answer will always be the same.
And your answer is what? Yes or no?
Everything that I've said stands.
And you said yes?
And so I've answered your question.
Can you articulate it one more time? Because I'm very hard of understanding.
No, I'm convinced that you're very good at understanding, and you know exactly what I mean right now. But what I've said right now is that our auto strategy was following the deal we did with China, which was good in your writing also because canola workers were finally able to get a deal.
I understand all about
and they've been wanting that deal for a long, long time. So our relationship with China is multifaceted.
Margaret McClung Johnson testified before this committee that because they don't want anyone to know, Canadians' forced labor import ban is only as strong as our ability to verify compliance. Right after this government issued its first imports permits to China, Beijing passed a national security regulation explicitly prohibiting anyone in China from disclosing information about their supply chains. How are you certain that we will be able to determine whether or not these components in these Chinese manufactured EVs are not being sourced from factories that employ forced labor?
Here's what Scott Moe, which is Conservative Premier from Saskatchewan, said following the deal we did with China. Finally, relief for canola farmers. This was long overdue. And so we needed to make sure that we got to a deal. Is it perfect? We can always work on making it better, but fundamentally, Chinese EVs are across the world right now, including in our closest allies in Europe. They are. They present the biggest, the latest technology. They're very popular across the country. And meanwhile, we need to make sure that we offer Canadian choice, because I know the Conservative Party is in favor of choice. We're in favor of choice. At the same time, we need to be able to protect our auto production. And that's why the conditions for Chinese automakers to come to Canada are clear.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Falk. Madame O'Rourke, 5 minutes, and that will end the hour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Minister Joly, and Mr. Vincent. Welcome, and thank you very much for being here. I just want to ask a couple of quick questions about today's announcement, and then move to a broader approach on the auto strategy. So MP Borelli said that there was a feeling around the table that mold makers or others, that the only thing that would help them was a trade deal. But I'm curious, so Associated Press was reporting that on Friday, President Trump said he's going to increase the tariffs charged on cars and trucks from the EU, despite them having a trade deal. So again, does anyone have a safe trade deal? And why is Canada so insistent that we are going to get a good deal rather than any deal to ultimately help our auto sector and all of our manufacturers and every Canadian business?
So we're following very closely the different deals that were struck by the White House. And obviously the one with Japan, the one with Korea, which all were linked to the auto sector very much, the one with the EU as well, which was, again, very important for the EU. And at the same time, we followed what the U.S. Supreme Court said regarding the different tariffs. And we know that there will continue to be unpredictability. Now, the Prime Minister is engaged in negotiations with the U.S. We know that the auto sector is key to that deal. And meanwhile, what we're trying to do is to continue to have investments, notwithstanding the uncertainty. So when you look at the different investments that have been made since the beginning of the trade war, actually increased production by Honda and Toyota, which is 75% of our production at this point. The Next Star facility, 2,500 new jobs. A third shift that was also open in Stellantis in Mrs. Borelli's writing. A new investment announced last week by GM of $690 million. So these are good news, notwithstanding. Also, we're working with Ford to, as they're finalizing their retooling and biggest investments in Ford's history in Canada. So that's also good news. But you know what? We learn from history. When you look at what happened in the 80s, car plants were being shut down across the country. And it was mainly, at the time, the D3 that were closing and shutting down car plants in my home province and also in Ontario. And what we did, we brought in Japanese automakers. And we work. It was the Liberal government under Pierre Trudeau that did that, and eventually it was actually activated and put into place under the Conservative government of Brian Mulroney. And 40 years later, what do? Actually, we're inspired by what happened at the time. We diversify. We change our ways of doing things. We don't take anything for granted. And so being able to bring new players from Europe, but also from China here working with our auto parts companies, Linamar, Magna, and also Martin Ria, is something that we think can be actually inspired by what we did in the 80s. This is the ethos of our strategy. This is what we've been able to work with. And we just won't sit idle while there are decisions made south of the border that are affecting our auto workers. We'll fight for different ways of protecting their jobs, but also we'll make sure that we're attracting new investments.
Minister, I have less than a minute.
Yeah.
So, yes. So we all understand that many of these businesses are looking for tariff relief. The government, for the past year, has introduced a suite of tools for that tariff relief. And I'm just wondering if you want to walk us through those from the last year, really the range, from Strategic Response Fund to regional tariff to work share, should it come to that. But to really remind people of how the auto strategy consolidated that and how today's announcement actually adds to it, to give the businesses some of that certainty that we're giving ourselves?
So, a couple of things. The entire steel sector in Canada, was dependent before the trade war to the automakers in Detroit. They were selling steel on the other side of the border, and that now is impossible because basically it's a tariff wall of 50% tariffs. And so what we've done is we worked with them to be able to not only develop a domestic market, but also develop different type of steel. And we're working with Algoma, we're working with Dofasco, we're working with Orion in Saskatchewan. We're working on the steel front. And now, while we're helping them through the strategic response fund, the $5 billion which you alluded to, what we're doing also, we're working with the supply chain, and that's why the regional development agencies are important. So meanwhile, while that is happening in the steel sector, we're working with the aluminum sector. The price of aluminum have just increased since the beginning of the trade war. So the profitability of the big players is actually very high. The thing is because of the uncertainty, they're not making the investments in their infrastructure. And so that's why we're providing CapEx money to support investments in the long run. Who is really affected is in Canada are the smaller players, part of the supply chain, because we don't have transformation capacity in this aluminum sector. We don't have a rolling mill, a plant in Canada. It is a problem, and that is why we're working to support even more the small players in the supply chain on the aluminum side. Now, when you look at the auto sector is affected, of course, because obviously of the tariffs. We've made sure that through the Strategic Response Fund of $5 billion, we're helping Honda, we're helping Toyota, we're helping Ford. Meanwhile, GM and Stellantis took decisions in Ingersoll and Brampton that were contrary to their obligations. Either they'll bring production back or we'll get our money back. And meanwhile,
Minister, I'm going to ask you to wrap it in about 20 seconds.
Meanwhile,
we're getting over here.
Meanwhile, what we're doing with them is we're trying to attract more investments. And so we want the Germans to invest. We want the Koreans to invest. We want the Chinese to invest. But when they do so, they need the rules must be clear. They need to respect labor standards in Canada. They need to support our localized supply chain, so basically auto parts, and they need to buy them from here. And finally, they need to have a secure software. And so that is what we're doing in the country. And meanwhile, I must say, I'm working with the EU right now to align our industrial policies to be able to create a common market to ultimately defend our auto workers together and be able also to export more cars to the EU.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, colleagues, that brings us to the end of the first hour. Thank you very much to the Assistant Deputy Minister and the Minister for being here. I believe we're going to see you again at this committee in a couple of weeks' time to have a broader conversation about the estimates.
To my great pleasure.
But until then, colleagues, I'm going to gavel us back in right at 4:45, which is in about 6 minutes, because we have 4 witnesses in the next panel. It's going to take us a bit of time. Meeting suspended.
Okay, so ethics is suspended right now as they bring in the ethics commissioner. So we are going to, let's see, we can tune into the finance committee while we wait for ethics.
Sorry, the third question was, the second question was about the indemnity. So that is basically a market instrument that adjusts according to the value of the investments on the balance sheet. It doesn't turn into a loss unless we actually sell those investments. So it's mark to market quarterly when we publish our financial statements. And then your third question, I mean, our financial statements roll up into the government's every year. So
you've reduced your balance sheet significantly since that point in time, and you're saying you're not, that your deficiency, the amount that the government has guaranteed you're not recognizing yet for some reason. At one point in time, it was much higher. I noticed that it was around $28 billion.
Well, our financial position rolls up into the government's financial statements at the end of every year. So,
So there's,
and
on your
Q-
balance sheet, there's an asset, a derivative instrument with the Government of Canada for $19 billion that they owe you as your asset, as well as cumulatively your $8 billion loss. 8.5.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at what point in time do you realize the actual derivative instrument here?
Only if we sell the instrument. Only if we sell the investments.
It's been coming down. It
Yeah.
was higher.
I
It's been
do
coming
notice that,
down as
yeah.
the bonds mature and roll off.
Yeah.
But most of the derivative hasn't rolled off
Well, a good part of it has.
Yeah.
from 28
There
to
are
19.
there are certainly some longer-term bonds that will take some time to roll off. So you're going to see that on our balance sheet. I expect you're going to see that for quite a long time.
Okay.
And it fluctuates with the market
It
rates.
fluctuates a bit with the market, but it is gradually coming down.
Okay, so prior to quantitative easing during the pandemic, you used to dividend the federal government about $1 billion a year, give or take, went towards consolidated revenue. That is now $8.5 billion in arrears. So it's going to be some time before it comes off, and it doesn't look like you're getting anywhere near positive cash flow at any point in time soon. Okay. The issue is in the budget, the government actually says they are going to stop collecting $19.3 million over 2 years from remittances to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Do you know what that's about?
Collecting.
Yeah, they're saying that $19.3 million they're not going to collect from the Bank of
Oh.
Canada anymore from the remittances.
I mean, we were recently given some additional mandates. And the way the government characterized how those would be funded in the budget was through not collecting remittances.
Okay.
That might have been
All right.
what you're referring to.
Governor, I notice here in your annual statement that you think you're at a normal balance sheet now and that you're managing it in a normal fashion, as in you don't have to buy and you don't have to sell Government of Canada securities. And yet it says very clearly here that you're going to start quantitative easing again come the likely start until 2027.
No, we're not. We
Well, let me
done,
quote,
We haven't
okay?
done quantitative easing.
Purchases
since
of
the
Government of
depths
Canada
the-
bonds
the-
for balance sheet management will likely not start until 2027.
We do a certain amount of buying and selling regularly. That's not quantitative easing. That's just managing our balance sheet. So,
Okay, that concludes
Our
the
balance
time
sheet
for this
grows
round.
with
We're
our
going to
liabilities
continue
grow
now.
and
Sorry,
our assets also
Mr.
grow.
Governor, we're going to continue
routine.
now with Mr. Sawatsky. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe if you wanted to just continue your train of thought that you were mentioning in the previous question, if you just wanted to finish there.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I was just going to say, yes, big picture, look, during COVID, the economy was down 15%. We had record levels of unemployment. We were in deflation. It was a very dire situation. We used a policy we have never used before, an emergency policy, quantitative easing. And together with other policies, the economy recovered. Did it all work perfectly? No, it didn't. But it did get us out of a very deep hole. We were one of the first countries to end quantitative easing. We haven't done quantitative easing in 3 or 4 years now. We after quantitative easing, we did quantitative tightening. We rolled off our balance sheet. We brought it back to more normal levels. Now we're basically back into a more normal balance sheet, and we're doing normal operations. People still hold our banknotes, cash. They're in circulation. And as the economy
Okay.
grows, people need more cash.
Ethics is on. Oh. Okay, they're just still suspended. They should be back any minute. We'll just go back and watch this for another minute or
That's a
so.
liability to the Bank of Canada. We hold assets to match our assets and liabilities. So yes, we have restarted buying small amounts of government debt as the asset to match our liability. That's how central banks work. That's how it worked before COVID. And those are routine operations.
Thank you. Well, I'll just start by saying thank you so much for coming, Governor and Senior Deputy Governor. It's truly an honor to speak with you again. So we've talked about disruptions to the oil market, and we haven't touched on the fertilizer market. I'm curious how that will affect food prices here in Canada. Is that something you could speak to?
Yeah, I mean, it's back to the question we were talking about earlier. It's a key input to food prices. It has a longer lag time to show up in food prices. It's usually about a year out because it affects the crop. I was actually out west about a month ago talking to farmers, and what I heard mostly was that because the crop last year was quite good, farmers had pre-purchased a lot of their fertilizer for this year. Not all farmers, and not probably in all cases, but so that will buffer them a bit from the current spike in fertilizer prices, but certainly just as with energy, if the price stays up for a long time,
Ethics is on.
that is.
Let's see what this Yahoo has to say.
And the code applies to all elected MPs. It just touches every level of federal decision making. We take a mandate-focused approach that advances three key objectives. First, we help elected and appointed officials identify and manage conflict of interest, ensuring that competent and qualified people can enter and leave the public service while maintaining the highest ethical standards. Deuxièmement, nous examinons les allégations de conflit d'intérêts et nous faisons rapport de nos conclusions de façon juste, indépendante et transparente.
It defaulted to floor video. That's weird.
Independent and transparent manner. Third, and most importantly, we help Canadians maintain trust that the actions of elected and appointed federal officials are free from conflicts of interest and improper influence. Ultimately, all of our work supports this key objective. The Commissioner's Office employs approximately 50 people. Our organizational structures, policies, and processes are designed to support efficient operations and responsible stewardship of public funds. Efficiency is also central to our annual spending review.
Requesting a modest budgetary increase of $227,000. This represents 2.5% of increase and would bring our total budget to just under $9.4 million. The increase is largely attributable to cost pressures, including a 2% salary increase consistent with other parliamentary entities and a corresponding adjustment to the employer portion of the employee benefit plan, which is set by Treasury Board. Our largest operational expense is our information technology services agreements, which we are obliged to make with the House of Commons. It represents $878,000 or 57% of our operating budget. We work closely with the House to ensure these systems remain secure and reliable, supporting both operational continuity and the protection of sensitive information. Nous sommes prêts à répondre à vos questions.
We are now ready to respond to your questions.
Moyen de temps, which we like. Mr. Barrett, 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Does the current law, or the law as it's currently written, adequately address perceived conflicts, or does it, in its current form, leave room for public doubt, even where formal compliance boxes have been checked?
Well, as you're aware, Mr. Barrett, I made some suggestion in my annual report that the Act is out of date and so needs amendment. And one of the things that I mentioned was in putting into the Act the issue of apparent conflict of interest. For the public, it's very difficult to make the distinction between apparent conflicts and real conflicts. And if you really want the public to have good confidence in the honesty of government, then we should avoid apparent conflict of interest.
And that's one that you would have noted was in the recommendations that this committee made in its report reviewing the Conflict of Interest Act, yes?
Yes.
In your response, you speak to shoring up that public confidence. When you were last at the committee, and if not the last time, in one of our recent conversations at committee, I raised the sale of controlled assets as the standard for divestment, and your answer, and I'm paraphrasing, was that the issues of valuation and structuring created difficulties, but you didn't say that divestment by sale was the wrong standard. Now, this is something that the committee recommended to the House, a sale-only rule for the Prime Minister. Is it fair to say that your concern is about implementation and not simply about the principle of stricter divestment, and as the committee recommended, divestment by sale?
You know, our present act makes it quite clear that what we want to pursue a dual mandate. On the one hand, we want to avoid conflict of interest. We want people to have confidence in their elected and official appointed officials. At the same time, we want to make sure that the best people come and serve in the public service, and they can do so without a harm to their existing financial position, their connections, etc. So that's the balance of it. Make sure the best people come in, but on the other hand, don't make it so expensive, so difficult that they won't come. And Parliament has made the choice. It's in the Act. And as you can see, as you know, there is a provision there that if there are controlled assets, you can put them in a blind trust. And that was a choice that Parliament made. Right. Parliament make changes or not, but as it is right now, that's how the Act is set out, and that's what I administer.
Right, and you know, the Parliament also decided not to have perceived conflicts included, and yet you've recommended that they be included. And this committee has made that recommendation. The committee has also made the recommendation about sale. And so I appreciate your caution, but it is something that you are able to speak to. So the difficulty for the public office holder is, again, the issue that you've raised. So if Parliament addressed valuation and tax issues, would the committee's recommendation for arm's length sale be a stronger safeguard for public confidence than the current blind trust option?
Well, that's exactly why you're elected, to make that decision. You know, I will administer it. You know, I'm not here to comment on your report. Your report was sent to the government. You will have hearings on it, and at that point in time, I will give my views of any amendments you suggest.
In fairness, Commissioner, you're making a recommendation on one, but you're refusing to say one way or the other on the other. So you're prepared to say that you do believe that a perceived conflict should be covered. So you've staked out very clear ground on that. And so in this case, I'm looking for the same. Either you agree or you don't. And so you've made it clear that you agree on the question of perceived conflicts being included, in spite of Parliament having excluded it originally. In this case, Parliament previously excluded it. The committee has recommended that there be a modification made to the law. You're well within your right, sir, to offer your opinion as you did on the former subject.
But my opinion, as set out in the annual report, was based on 3 years of experience in this job and what are the really urgent needs that should be addressed because it's outdated. You know, such as things that here I mentioned, exchange-traded funds, etc. You have to get rid of them because they're controlled asset. I never understood why that. Presumably because it didn't exist. Now you're talking about really making a value judgment. I made my value judgment on the question that you're pointing right now. Is this excessive, asking people to divest? Does that mean we won't get good people to access? Or is it something that is necessary? That's really an official judgment that Parliament I can give my opinions to it when such an amendment is presented or discussed.
Thank you.
But it's not something that I advocate at this point in time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ms. Church, 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Commissioner, thank you for being here with your colleagues today and for your continuing work in this capacity. You know, I wanted to pick up, well, probably first of all, to ensure that just for all of us in the room and for anyone watching, that my colleague Mr. Barrett referred to the report of the committee. It was a majority report. On this side of the table, we issued quite a strong dissenting opinion. One of the areas that I want to explore with you a little bit has to do with the majority report did recommend removing some of the purposes of the Act, including the purposes dealing with 3D, encouraging experienced and competent persons to seek and accept public office, and the purpose of this Act in facilitating interchange between the private and public sector. And I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Commissioner, if you agree that those remain important purposes of the Act?
Well, if you remove those, you really amend the whole concept of the Act. As I mentioned in answer to Mr. Barrett, the Act is a balance between bringing the best people in and trying making sure there are no conflicts. If you're now suddenly taking the goal away that you want to bring in the best people into the public service or to then it becomes very questionable whether why are you doing this? What are you trying to achieve here? All it means that it will be much more difficult for people to come into and serve the public than it is right now. And it seemed to me that the dual goals expressed in the Act is actually a very good balance, and making that balance and making the right decision is part of my job. But it is the two twin goals that we want. We want people to have confidence in their public officials, but we also want to make sure that the best one come in, not only those who have no conflicts because they have no assets, they have not done anything that could possibly amount to a conflict.
Mm-hmm. And in that vein, then, as your office would administer and provide advice on to parliamentarians, the tools in your toolkit, whether that's disclosure, whether that's blind trust, whether that's a conflict of interest screen, in your assessment, these tools work well to ensure that we are able to establish the balance that you're speaking of?
Now, you heard in your hearings regarding the possible improvements of the Act, how everybody basically said we are close to the gold standard and internationally in terms of conflict of interest. And we have managed to avoid any serious conflict of interest. And, no government has fallen over conflict of interest. There are no big scandals, etc. The system is not perfect, no question about it, can be improved, etc. But by and large, it works and works well.
Mm-hmm. One of the other areas where we had some disagreement on the committee and where our dissenting report goes into some detail is around the question of a general application. And I just wanted to put this back to you. When you appeared with your legal counsel, I think Michael Aquilino, he stated that the general application exemption is found in all ethics regimes in Canada and that it is almost a uniform provision across all provinces. Can you confirm that that is still the case?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anyone that does not have a general application exemption. Mm-hmm. That's after all the job of parliaments to make sure of jobs of rules that apply generally and etc. And if you apply it for everybody, just because you have an interest in that doesn't mean you should be disqualified.
Do you see a challenge were Parliament to remove this general application in terms of the functioning of the executive of government, ministers, the Prime Minister, parliamentary secretaries, in the absence of a general application provision?
Well, I would make it very, very difficult because just think of, for instance, the Income Tax Act. It's just general application, applies to everybody. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean all of you pay income tax. I pay income tax. You can't now make rules on tax. No, there has to be. You may not call it a general exemption, but there has to be something that you can be able to do your job and legislate in something that applies to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. Maybe one last question for you, Mr. Chair. If I have time?
53 seconds.
Okay. In terms of controlled assets, one of the debates we've had on this committee is around holding controlled assets and the operation of a blind trust. When a controlled asset enters into a blind trust, is it considered divested in your estimation?
Yes, that's what the Act provides. You go either divest it or you put it in a blind trust. The goal being you don't touch it, you don't know what happens to it, you can't and you can't influence its value.
And so once an asset is put into a blind trust,
Yeah.
the person who would have been the original holder of it is considered to have divested that asset?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Church. Mr. Bonin pour 6 minutes.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you to your assistants as well. I would like to come back to modernizing the access to information legislation or the ethics legislation, and I would like to know whether or not there are 3 priorities that would need to be implemented that you could share with us. The matter of the controlled assets. That's too strict.
Why is this translator so slow?
Financial markets are being developed. We should have the opportunity to assess because there are new tools that are available for divestment. Secondly, if I am not capable to exercise my mandate, well, the office can't make any decisions, so there needs to be someone who is able to make these decisions in my name. I believe it should be perhaps the lobbying commissioner. There needs to be a mechanism in place for that. And third recommendation, there are a lot of things that you can do there are a lot of things that are banned for public servants, but that should be allowed. Teaching at university without pay, for example. If you wanted to give a course on how government functions, for example. Currently, if you wanted to teach in university, it's not possible. Mr. Bonnet, if somebody says to you, you should work for us, because unions are asking for members to be employees, but I can't tell you to do that. You're not allowed to share your knowledge or your expertise, even though you would be sharing your knowledge with students. It's impossible. And so the legislation needs to be amended when it is not a conflict of interest. Do you believe that the current framework is too archaic? Does there need to be a reform? Can you clarify, please? I'll give you an example. Currently, there's the Major Projects Office that was created by the federal government. In that office, there are people who are on loan by banks and businesses, and they're sharing their expertise with the Major Projects Office, but they're also receiving some form of compensation by their previous employer, for example, a bank. The person has to follow an individual conflict of interest framework, but a bank could be, or rather they could be working on a specific project. The person signs a document so that they're not in a conflict of interest, but should we review the framework in cases like these? Was this person appointed by an order in council? An order in council. They were appointed by cabinet? In the case that you are describing, this person is not someone who would be subject to our legislation? Why wouldn't they be? Because they're not appointed, but they're being hired by the Major Projects Office. They're employed, yes, but they're not appointed. You're talking about the Major Projects Office. There are people who are appointed by an order in council, and those people are accountable and need to fill out an ethics declaration, but the others aren't subject to our legislation. Perhaps we can come back to this later during your next round of questioning. This completes the first round of questions. We're going to move on to our second round. Mr. Hardy, you have 5 minutes. Thank you for being with us today. You talked about the highest ethical standards and trust in our institutions. This should be our main mission, and it needs to be completed quickly. I just want to understand the process for budgetary processes, for example. So you need to have that approved by the Speaker of the House, who is currently a Liberal, but it depends on the government, and the President of Treasury Board, correct? Yes. How is there independence when you need to have your budget approved by those who you might be eventually investigating? I believe that you should be entirely independent, but you have to report to people who could have a monetary influence on your ability to investigate. Does that not seem to be a conflict there? Well, someone needs to authorize my budget. We could have a committee like for judges that would decide what our budget should be and recommend that to government. So it would be a good idea for you to be entirely independent. Well, if there's a conflict, well, we speak to the Speaker, we justify ourselves, and this is sent to the President of Treasury Board, and then it's approved. It's almost always a very short discussion regarding what is needed. So most of the time there are no issues. Perhaps I could add that our budget is something that we table with the Speaker of the House, and that's for consideration. It's not an approval that we are seeking. After that, our request is sent to Treasury Board, and then it's up to the committee here to ask us questions on our budget. So you'll come before committee. We just finished a study on conflicts of interest and on real and perceived conflict of interest in a press conference. the Liberals stated that they were going to be against 20 out of 23 or even all of the recommendations. So if we're asking questions here at committee and witnesses make proposals and we have a report that then is completely rejected because we don't have the control of an oversight committee, how can that be ethical? Because we're going around in circles here. We invite witnesses, we hear their testimonies, we make recommendations, but then it's up to the government in power, and then if they reject everything, well, how can we add the element, for example, in this case, of the perceived conflict of interest into the legislation? If you want to change the act, then you should. Well, then we have to deal with those who are making this legislation. There was a sovereign fund as well for investing in infrastructure and carbon neutrality. That fund will be led by a CEO and a board that will be independent. Nothing has been shared yet or disclosed yet. You talked about the importance of a perceived conflict of interest. If we look at the financial interests, well, they are completely aligned with Brookfield's interests. So we have a prime minister here who's linked to this fund. We know that his assets are in a blind trust, but he is linked to that. He has ties with these new goals. Will the mechanisms be implemented, the screen, or are you forced to reassess every situation and decide whether or not a screen will be required? The screen is the second step. If there's a conflict of interest, the person needs to recuse themselves. We establish the screen after that. And so the topic will be presented to the person who is to make that decision. For the Prime Minister, for example, if the screen is applied, a document will be presented to him. It's another minister who would make the decision. This is a way to avoid potential issues. It does not change the system. Mr. Commissioner, your time is up. Your time is up. Madame Lapointe, you have 5 minutes, just over 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you to our witnesses for being with us. You know that we tabled a report recently. You know that there was also a dissenting report. Michael Sabia and Marc-André Blanchard, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, and they both said that these ethics screens work well. Do you still agree with that assessment? Yes? Great. Yes, generally it works well. There are always potential improvements, and efficiencies can always be made, but I think that our system does work well and can build trust in government. One of the recommendations that we shared was as follows: that the Government of Canada amend Section 15 of the Conflict of Interest Act in order to award the Conflict of Interest Commissioner the discretionary power to authorize designated public office holders to participate in activities such as teaching, participate in charity work as soon as it is determined that there would be no conflict of interest. In your response to member MP Bonnet, can you say whether or not this is a good idea? Yes. This is something that is in my report. This is something that happens quite frequently. There's someone who's subject to the legislation. They have knowledge that they could share with a university or something like that, and they're told that they cannot do that, even if there isn't a conflict of interest. If I could authorize that, well, then all of that needs to be done pro bono, of course. But I believe that there are a lot of people in government and in parliament who have knowledge that they would like to share, and there needs to be a way for them to do that. Thank you. I would like to come back to the recent report. I know that my colleague touched upon this earlier. Do you agree that it is important to encourage knowledgeable people to seek a position in government and to facilitate exchanges between the public and the private sectors? Is that your recommendation? As I explained, there needs to be a balance. We want to ensure there are no conflicts of interest, but we also want to attract the best people to government. I think that we have that balance right now, and I don't think that things need to change. We want to have the best and most qualified people in government. Thank you. And now, another question regarding the report. And this is now for the ethics report. What would be the impact on your organization if the recommendations made by the committee regarding the Conflict of Interest Act, if those recommendations were adopted? It really depends on how it will be written into the legislation. Would we be recognizing the perceived conflicts of interest, and would there be order-making power? Would there be additional definitions? And what would the powers be for the commissioner in that case? I would need to see the specific changes before I can comment. Thank you. It can help build the public's trust. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Ms. Lapointe. Mr. Bonnet, if you would like 5 minutes, I'll give you 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, do you believe that the government should move to reform the legislation? This is part of my annual report. Do you believe that you need additional votes in order to increase transparency, reduce conflicts of interest, and in order to build the public's trust in government? As I said, the system is working well for now. How would you compare Canada to other OECD or G7 countries regarding our conflict of interest legislation? You heard from witnesses here. Canada is a good example. We have legislation that works to avoid scandals. The goal of the legislation is met. We have a system that is preventive and that works well. We need to declare, or everyone needs to declare their conflicts of interest. And then you have a code of conduct. And then you can receive advice from my office, for example. Inaudible. In other jurisdictions, there are different ways of doing things. They might have two bodies responsible for conflicts of interest. They'll detect potential conflicts of interest, but they decide. We have a very preventive system. I'll come back to my previous question. Somebody who is hired by the Major Projects Office, you're saying if they're employed directly by the Major Projects Office, that person would not be subject to the Conflict of Interest Act? I'm not sure that I understood your response. Who are we speaking of? Are you talking about the person who is responsible for these major projects? No, the people who are the subordinates, the employees. The employees are not appointed by an order in council. They need to follow the code, but I'm not responsible for it. Departments have their own code of conduct that needs to be followed, but they're not subject to the legislation. Thank you. I just wanted to be sure that I understood. Is there any issue? We talk about these revolving doors of lobbyists, people who work at government, they go back, they work for businesses. Do you think there's an issue there for a timeline in being an employee and then an MP or a minister? A very brief response, please, Commissioner. You only have 5 seconds left. Apologies. I did not understand your question. Mr. Hardy, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. You just said that we have a preventive system but it doesn't include the perceived conflict of interest. So we have to wait for a conflict of interest to happen before we can act. And last time you came here, you said that if projects are moving forward quickly, well then the perceived conflicts of interest might be more significant and we would need to act uphill. I asked a question regarding the Major Projects Office. Ms. Farrell, who was appointed to lead the Major Projects Office, she was responsible for TransAlta for 9 years and had Brookfield as a co-owner. When she was appointed, did the Prime Minister's screen apply to her as well, her assets, to ensure that we are protecting Canadians? But is it, or is she not subject to the legislation? Are we focusing on prevention realistically, or do we have to wait for a problem to occur? She's subject to the legislation. So she had a screen. She put all her assets in a blind trust. We're sure that all of her decisions for choosing these major projects, they won't end up in a conflict of interest, even though we know that she was part of a business that was co-owned by Brookfield. If there's a conflict of interest, she'll need to recuse herself if she has a conflict of interest. All of the different elements of her declaration are confidential, as you know. But she did have to declare what her assets are, and we say what is possible, what needs to be divested, what needs to be put into a trust, and that was done with her. So the process was completely applied. Now, with the Major Projects Office, I came upon something that surprised me. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but this is something that's being talked about in my riding, and I received messages on this. So the Major Projects Office, and let's go back a little bit. We talked about the Prime Minister in Brookfield. We know that Brookfield received some $250 million from China. And as soon as the Prime Minister was appointed, there were 2 trips back-to-back in China, and then a corridor was opened to Chinese mines, and there might be conflicts there. But in a case like that one, where would you intervene? Are you currently able to see whether or not decisions were made that might have been shady, or do you have to wait for an official investigation? Where would you intervene in such a potential conflict of interest? We intervene if there's a complaint, if somebody writes to us and flags a problem. We look to see whether or not there is a conflict of interest, and that would allow us to open an investigation potentially. I have power under the legislation to launch an investigation if there's any indications in the news, for example, that there's a possible conflict of interest. So you have that ability if there's a perceived conflict of interest. No, it's more than that. We need to have... Well, these are facts, and we've talked about it frequently here. We shared facts with you last time. These are not perceptions. And so, can you act as soon as the facts are shared with you, or do you have to wait? I don't have to wait for concrete evidence. If there's a reasonable suspicion. Last question. Your budget is $9.4 million. We heard from the Access to Information Commissioner. Her budget is about $17 million. And given that there's the possibility of having so many potential conflicts of interest, and it's a particular case, but do you believe that you have the resources that you need to deal with the number of potential conflicts of interest? Quick answer, please. The screen can help prevent a lot of these conflicts of interest. We believe that the budget that was given to us will be adequate. Mr. Al-Sood.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for joining us today. Commissioner, we see that other commissioners, alongside their main estimates, also have their departmental plans posted online, which allows us to better understand their spending and operations. Can you let us know why your office does not have it posted online?
Anne-Marie?
Well, we don't fall under the Treasury Board Secretariat, so we don't have a departmental plan.
Fantastic. And with the following information not being public, could you please walk us through the two core budgetary purposes of your office?
Our budgetary process?
Yes.
Okay, Anne-Marie, please go ahead.
You're asking about the budgetary process?
Purposes. The budgetary purposes.
How do we... Well, I mean, our budgetary process, as we discussed before, is we look what we need, what was the likely coming our way, and what will be the mandatory increases and projected costs. And we submit it as a budget to the President, to the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House then examines it closely, discusses with that, wants to see his justifications why we need this and what for. He then approves it or he changes it, what he has done, he then passes on to the Treasury Board, and the President of Treasury Board approves it, and it goes automatically into the estimates.
Fantastic. We've just heard from Ms. Maynard about the challenge of maintaining both independence and public confidence, particularly when dealing with high-profile or publicly sensitive cases. I'd like to offer you the opportunity to speak to that. Do you experience similar challenges, given the nature of your role?
She is in different positions in terms of budget, as she explained to you. She would love to be in a situation like we are, or the Parliamentary Budget Office, where in effect, they are not part of a departmental budget, but they are, because they're agents of Parliament, they get the money directly from Parliament. And I can understand her aspirations. I fully support them.
Towards the tail end of my colleague Ms. Church's testimony, you said something that I think we all do well to bear in mind, and I quote, "The system's not perfect, but by and large, it does work." That tone, perhaps not of positivity, but of confidence in our system, is reassuring, and we often highlight the bad because, yes, improvements are always of value, but scarcely do we speak of the good in most contexts. What is it about our system that you find is so effective? Monsieur Bonin asked a similar question earlier, but I feel that there was more room to expand, and I'd like to give you that opportunity.
Well, two things, as I think I've mentioned before. First of all, it tries to make a balance between avoiding conflict of interest, but still at the same time attracting and allowing the best people to go in the public service and contribute this. Yeah. Secondly, we deal with it at the front. It's preventative. Before you can take your job, you have to come to me and tell exactly what are the possible things, and we'll try to find a solution. So it's not that you suddenly find yourself in a solution and say, God, what do I do now? Etc. And you have to go make public excuses. No, it's pre-planned. We see it and try to avoid it. Obviously, it's not perfect. Nobody can foresee what's coming. But these two factors of the law that we have, I think, are really the source of its success. It's the balance and the pre-planning.
Another piece we discussed with Ms. Maynard was her office's efforts to increase efficiencies, though themselves exempt from the expenditure review. I know that your office, too, as an agent of Parliament, is in a similar position, but has your office undergone a similar process?
No, we are exempt from it. We are trying to be as efficient as possible, and especially we are trying to use modern means to do it. For instance, we have, at the request of the House, established this training course online, so that rather than you wasting your time and we employing lots of people to teach you and make you aware of what's the conflicts. There's an online training course, which goes through all permutation, etc., which has meant that we give the people who were involved in that beforehand, the number has been reduced and so on. So that's the same thing. We have lots of forms that you have to fill out. Unfortunately, as you know, it's a paper-heavy process. We have revised the forms, and I'm waiting for the House Committee on Process to approve the forms so that they're easier for you, and that in effect from one year to the next you can just say it's same as last year except section 5 or something like that, rather than having to refill everything and so on.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Al-Sood. Got time for 2 4-minute rounds. I'm going to go to Mr. Barrett first and then Ms. Chagger after that. Mr. Barrett, go ahead.
You've said that the Act should include apparent conflicts. So is it fair to say that the law in its current form is not sufficient in protecting public confidence in public office, senior public office holders?
I think that's overstating it. I think the idea is public confidence could be increased. I never said that there is no public confidence in senior officials. But I mean, for the man on the street, the appearance of conflict of interest and the real conflicts of interest are very difficult to distinguish. And very often there is an appearance, but there is no actual pecuniary benefit, and so there is no conflict of interest. And why aren't you doing anything about it?
Right. And to be clear, I didn't assert that there wasn't confidence. What I asked was if it was sufficient to protect public confidence, or in its current form, is it insufficient in its scope to protect public confidence? When a minister or a prime minister has large and complex financial interests, does the current framework put too much weight on internal screens, recusals, and trust arrangements rather than on big, bright line, clear to understand rules for members of the public? You mentioned someone on the street not being really sure about, this doesn't pass the sniff test to me. Why aren't you doing something about it? And the you could be elected members. It could be officers of parliament. Just why isn't someone doing something about this? Would that not be would that not be better as an aspiration for us in our development and modifications of the Act?
If public confidence is hard to define, and what creates it, and how to strengthen it, there's no magic bullet. There's no way of addressing it. Clearly, it isn't as great as it should be, or we would want it to be. But what are the measures you can do it, and how you did to do what is I'm not quite sure.
Okay, let me put a precision on that. I have 1 minute left, and I'll give the time to you. What is the single most important amendment that Parliament could pass to make a positive change for public confidence in the system and in executives?
That's exactly what I just said before. There's no silver bullet. It's a whole bunch of little things, etc., that you can do to create. I don't think there's one.
Could you name one?
Well,
I'm genuinely just looking to give us a bit more direction. We had a minority report, we had a majority report, and then we have the expert on the application of the Act and the Code in front of us, and that's the spirit of my question.
And we now got 10 seconds left.
Well, I think clearly we're dealing with appearance of conflict of interest. A good definition of what appearance of conflict is and how it would be administered would help.
Okay, thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Ms. Chagger for 4, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. It's been nice to hear the exchange and how you take your responsibilities in the role. And I think the past experiences you have definitely demonstrate with the regard and respect you hold for this office, and it's a very important office. So thank you for your service. As you have heard tonight and in the past, the committee has recently had the Prime Minister's conflict of interest screen brought to its attention. Could you please speak to your communications with the Prime Minister's office, particularly with its two administrators, Michael Sabia and Marc-Andre Blanchard, and perhaps just a sense of how often your offices might communicate with each other?
As you know, each person who's subject to act has a person in my office designated as his or her special contact. So it's that way we also have designated somebody for the two people you're talking about, Mr. Sabia and Mr. Marchand, and he gets advice from, they contact him when they have a problem, and he gives them advice. As you know, it's all confidential. So it's up to them whether they want to disclose it or not. They do talk to him, and Mr. Sabia, I think, has offered to you to give you certain periodic reports on his contacts, etc. As I say, it's the way the whole system is set up that we are there to give advice. We don't disclose. They disclose whether they talk to us and what we told them or not.
So there's this constant challenge with public perception, and there's these doubts constantly being placed in people's minds. I hear from constituents. Can constituents have confidence that you and your team take your job seriously? If you hear something and something needs to be looked at, that you would do your job and fulfill ensuring that there is no conflict?
I certainly hope they do that. I mean, this is the beauty of the system, is that if you have a problem, you can in complete confidence come to me, and I will not disclose it to anybody. I cannot be forced to disclose it. On the other hand, my job and my aim is to make sure that your conflict goes away, that you deal with it, and you deal with it in an honorable way, etc. And that's how it works for everybody, including the Prime Minister. Obviously, when somebody has a larger responsibility and so many assets as Mr. Carney does and some other people, it gets more complicated and it requires more work from us.
And that's interesting because I understand former Prime Minister Stephen Harper's Chief of Staff, Guy Joyner, had come and he had basically stated that the Commissioner would know what assets exist and where there is a screen, and that you would know, they know all assets in blind trust and what are not in blind trust. The Commissioner's office would know that.
Yeah.
Correct. And so do you believe that the screen functions effectively? Because the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, recognized that it is a good regime. Do you believe it continues to function?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, remember, why do we have a screen? The screen is there so that the Prime Minister can function, so he doesn't have to constantly think, can I do this or not do it? Do I have to recuse myself, etc.? So it's, in effect, in order to allow him so things don't come onto his desk that he can't handle. They're handled before and they're being kept away from him so he can freely make his decision. And when there is something that causes a conflict, somebody else makes a decision. Who administers it is the Chief of Staff and and the Clerk of the Privy Council. Both of their jobs is to protect the Prime Minister. If they don't protect him, if they let something through that causes a conflict of interest, it's, their job is on the line. So it's in their own self-interest to make sure that the screen works and is as tight as possible.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Ms. Bardish, for being here with us today. We're now going to move to committee business on the motion moved by Mr. Barrett on April 23rd, 2026. Mr. Barrett, you have the floor.
Chair, on the motion, which I believe is as amended.
Thank you.
The request is a simple transparency measure, and it speaks to the subject matter of the meeting.
Sorry, Mr. Barrett, just to remind you, we're on the amendment of the motion. I didn't make that clear when we started. If you want to start from the top, go ahead, please.
So the and if you could or have the clerk just restate just where we're at with respect to the motion,
okay.
Just for the purposes of our being in public.
I can do that.
Okay,
I can do that. So the motion that you moved April 23rd, 2026, was to require the Privy Council office to provide the committee on the 15th day of each month with a report detailing each time an assessment was undertaken relating to the application of the Prime Minister's Conflicts of Interest Screen pursuant to the assessment tool on the application of the Prime Minister's Conflict of Interest Screen, including assessments originating in the PCO or any department from the previous month, that these reports include 1. A summary of each instance where an assessment was triggered, 2. The record of the outcome of each analysis, 3. Any records of discussions or considerations that are in the possession of the PCO or any department related to each analysis, including notes and meeting minutes, and 4. Any correspondence related to each analysis, including emails, text messages, instant messages, and other records of conversations, that the first report be provided to the committee by no later than June 15th, 2026, and shall include the complete set of information for each assessment since the Prime Minister's Conflicts of Interest Screen came into effect. And B, order the production of the Prime Minister's travel itineraries and related records for all international travel he has taken since he became Prime Minister that are in the possession of the Privy Council Office, the Prime Minister's Office, or any federal government department, that these include but not be limited to each meeting the Prime Minister attended and every attendee at these meetings, and that these documents be provided to the committee in both official languages and without redaction within 6 weeks of the adoption of this motion. And the amendment that was moved by Ms. Church under debate was that paragraph B be deleted, meaning that paragraph B, which refers to the order of the production of the Prime Minister's travel itineraries and related records for all international travel he has taken since he became Prime Minister that are in the possession of the Privy Council Office, the Prime Minister's Office, or any federal government department, that these include but not be limited to each meeting the Prime Minister attended and every attendee at these meetings, and that these documents be provided to the committee in both official languages and without redaction within 6 weeks of the adoption of this motion. Sorry for repeating that, but that was what the amendment proposed by Ms. Church had removed in the motion. So we're on that amendment.
Okay, so on the amendment from Ms. Church, I want to make 2 important points about good faith and the opportunity that we have to proceed with the consideration of the amendment, and then should the amendment pass, the motion as amended, it does 2 things. First of all, if I were to presuppose that Ms. Church's amendment were to pass with a view to having this motion adopted by the committee, I think that would demonstrate a level of transparency that after last week, when we saw a series of committees move in camera, that everyone takes seriously the opportunity that we have to provide ongoing transparency for Canadians. We had a change, it seems longer than a week ago, but a week ago with the makeup of committees. So we have new regular members of this standing committee. Welcome all. And with that, it changes the dynamics, including on accountability committees, of which this is one. This is why the official opposition, the chair is selected from the official opposition for this committee, for the Government Operations Committee, for public accounts as well, for those committees. What I'd say is that the substance of the motion as amended does allow for a level of information that, or an amount of information that does satisfy concerns, ongoing concerns that we've seen raised. We get submissions, from members of the public, information that they want us to receive. We see the public discourse. We read the news, and there are questions about this about the use of this conflict of interest screen in the Prime Minister's office. And so providing that detail to a standing committee allows us to serve the function that we're supposed to serve, and that it's not simply by adding a couple members from the governing party to committee that we're going to lose the opportunity for that accountability. And so I won't seek to impugn motives on why committees were moved in camera last week, because it happened at multiple committees. Instead, what I'm going to do, Chair, is I would offer publicly to all of my colleagues that if the amendment was made to this motion to strike B because it was too much information, the volumes of information and the work that it would generate would be too much and slow down the Prime Minister's department in being able to deliver on its mandate, and that's the reason that it's been deleted, but it's with a view to pass the main motion, well, then I would concede that I wouldn't impede the amendment from moving forward, that Section B could be struck, and that we could proceed with passing the main motion, which consumed, I think, many hours, more than a dozen hours of public debate last week. And so I think that we have that opportunity, and I think that the government House Leader spoke last week on television about that merely a coincidence had occurred in committees having been moved in camera. And so we have that opportunity in public today to pass this motion, to provide that ongoing transparency kind of in a rolling way. And I think that the Privy Council office has demonstrated that they have the capacity to furnish us with the information already. And so it would just be having that occur on an ongoing basis. And so let's see that. Let's get that accountability. Let's do what we can collectively as members to bolster public confidence, because I fear that us not simply enacting this transparency mechanism, that we would see ourselves potentially undermining what is a fragile thing, and that's the confidence that we have entrusted to us by Canadians. But at the same time, by passing the amendment, we would be achieving what had been suggested to be too onerous an ask for the department. I disagree, but you know what? I've never worked in PCO, so perhaps it is too onerous for them. So let's assume that it is. Let's move past that and adopt the main motion and provide that transparency to Canadians.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett. I have Ms. Church on the amendment. Ms. Church, on your amendment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have a question for you, first of all, actually, if you could just indulge me for a moment, and that was just in terms of the timing of this meeting. So we're past our allocated amount of time. What is your forward plan for the committee? Because I don't have a problem debating this or this motion. I would appreciate, given that we're all parliamentarians, we all have commitments outside of our allotted committee times, what is your approach going to be to handling the committee's time and to the debate of motions like this? Is this something that we could schedule during our regularly allocated committee time? Can you describe to us what you see as the committee's forward scheduling for the next few meetings?
Okay, I can't commit to anything from a forward scheduling standpoint. I felt that this motion was important to dispose of, so I asked for additional resources to deal with it, and I think we can deal with it relatively quickly, and this is why I scheduled it for tonight. So on the amendment.
Well, okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, look, on this amendment, we do absolutely operate in good faith. And Mr. Chair, I think we just actually had a very good session with the Ethics Commissioner again on the main estimates, where we've heard some of his testimony again relating back to the origins of this motion, Mr. Barrett's motion and inquiry. We heard from the Ethics Commissioner about the operation of the Prime Minister's screen and setup. And again, I think one of our primary objections to this has been that the independent agent of Parliament, that is the Ethics Commissioner, who has been charged with oversight for compliance with this act, for providing advice to every parliamentarian, every member of the executive, with advice on their personal affairs, on how to arrange those affairs in a way that meets the standard, meets the test of avoiding a conflict of interest under the Act, has come forward yet again tonight in front of this committee to tell us that in his estimation, the arrangements pertaining to the Prime Minister's screen and the assets that he held prior to assuming office, that the current situation is working well. We have an agreement in place with the Prime Minister's office via Mr. Sabia and Mr. Blanchard, who appeared here a number of months ago, to provide us on a continuing basis with information pertaining to the Prime Minister's screen. That information has been forthcoming to the committee. The committee has that in their possession. And additionally, we know that under the conflict of interest regime, that if the screen is ever put into, if the Prime Minister is ever in a situation where he must recuse himself, that is also transparently disclosed on the conflict of interest website, in addition to the transparency surrounding all of his assets and all of his compliance measures, as it is with every other designated public office holder, member of the government executive, and the hundreds of other senior public servants for whom this act applies. So, Mr. Chair, we understand that in looking at this motion, that our primary objection to the way it was structured and our objection to Section B in particular has been that time remains one of the most precious resources we have as a committee, as a parliament, and as a government. And I think we've approached this and other motions like it in a very similar fashion to suggest that it is within the committee's ambit to discuss every motion that's brought forward by a member of the committee, to consider it on the merits, to consider how useful it's going to be, how productive it is going to be, but also to understand that all of us here could bring forward motions at any given point in time. They're not all going to pass unamended. They're not all going to pass and become business for the committee to study. We have studies that are already awaiting scheduling, and we're 2 months before the end of our parliamentary term. We are certainly not going to get through all of the business that this committee has already set out to dive into over the last number of months. So that is one of the reasons why, for a motion like this, we do scrutinize it, and we are conscious of the fact that members of the opposition here are seeking records, some of which have already been provided and will continue to be provided, and some of which go beyond, far beyond the scope of what is reasonable. So, Mr. Chair, I think what I would propose that we do on this amendment that we have is to move this to a vote on the amendment.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Church. You're ceding your time on the floor. You've asked for a vote. I still have a speaking list, and that includes Mr. Hardy. So go ahead. Until I have exhausted the speaking list, we're not going to have a vote. So go ahead, Mr. Hardy. Commencez, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, listen, once again, we're getting back to something that is very fundamental. We've just had a discussion with the Ethics Commissioner. He said to what extent transparency was the number one thing for people to have confidence in our institutions. So if I discuss this motion, because I know we'll be asked to get back to this, I said the last time that transparency about the Prime Minister's travel is very important, because this is a globe-trotting Prime Minister who goes all over the world for many reasons. Sometimes we wonder why. Other times we say that he's trying to negotiate something. But, for instance, we came up with meal expenses within the aircraft, which raised questions among the public. Point B mentions many different things about travel, about who he meets, and so on. We just want more transparency so that citizens can know that decision makers, people for whom they voted or not, how the money is spent. I think this was a good motion, but once again, my colleague Michael Barrett has proposed, and we've done it often here, that we work together. We're told we're the opposition, we're opposed to everything. We've discussed our role. Our role is to ensure that we improve processes so that it's always the citizens who's at the heart of decision making. So last week, once there was a vote in the House of Commons, when you took control of committees, we heard 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, hooray in the House of Commons, and 15 minutes later, you all came down here and you made this meeting go into in camera. What does that mean? That means that we can't discuss what was said here for 30 years after the meeting. We have to keep it secret. Secrecy is the reverse of transparency. So it's important to clarify this. It didn't happen only here. This is something that happened in many different committees. Notably, oversight committees, where the role of the committee is to ensure that there's transparency and that the government can make decisions that the people can be aware of. 2 commissioners talked about transparency today, and the first thing that this newly majority government say, and this was not voted for by citizens, because these 3 by-elections were already Liberals who were re-elected, so these were deals struck behind the curtains. Yes, majority governments normally have majority on committees when citizens decide so, not when there are deals later on. So there's only one question asked, like you did last week, by getting control over the committee and doing that. We were told that we had to be careful with paperwork. It didn't make sense. It would create too much paper burden. We feel that having enough access to analyze things is important. It allows us to ask the right questions. You say that the committee's time is very important. Well, that's kind of special, coming from people who spent 24 hours making monologues. One of your colleagues talked all by himself for 70 minutes. 70 minutes. He just arrived. He's all proud of himself. So we saw this conference by my colleague who talked for 70 minutes, and then you tell us that we have to be careful with the committee's time. So I understand that liberal arrogance rises week to week, but I think we can have some kind of cooperation because we're prepared. If you guarantee that we'll vote and that'll be settled afterwards, we'll do what Ms. Church proposed. We'll withdraw that portion, but Part A is very important. And if we can get transparency and accountability from this government, then we'll be the first to support it. So our role is to monitor things, ensure that the government is always accountable for its decision, that there's as much transparency as possible. The motion before you is simple and effective. It asks for transparency. Your first reflex was to go in camera so that there would be no transparency, and now here today we're starting this over. We're asking you whether or not you're for transparency. If the answer is yes, we'll see it right away. It'll be settled, and we can move forward together and cooperate for the welfare of the citizens of Quebec and Canada. If the answer is no, then I think people will understand your intentions as you demonstrated last week, and you will no doubt continue to do that here week after week. That's what I had to say, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hardy.
Anybody else on my list? So we're on the amendment. Because there's no speakers, I will go to the vote. And are we on division? I'm gonna call for a recorded vote on this. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Clerk. On the amendment, we're on the amendment.
On the amendment by Ms. Church, Mr. Alsud. Yes. Ms. Chagger. Ms. Church? Mr. Genero?
Yes.
Madame Lapointe?
Oui.
Mr. Barrett?
I'll abstain.
Mr. Bonk? Monsieur Hardy?
Je vais démontrer ma bonne foi. Et je vais dire oui.
I'll show my goodwill and say yes.
Je dis non.
Okay.
Yeas of 6 and nays 1.
Okay, so the amendment carries to delete Part B. We are on the main motion now as amended. Ms. Church, main motion as amended. Go ahead.
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to vote on that. Thank you to my colleagues across the way for supporting that amendment. I think we are making some progress here in terms of our desire to get to a place where we can, where we're more comfortable. Mr. Chair, I think one of the things that we need to do a little bit is we would like to take a look at this motion and reflect some of what the arrangement is that we have with Privy Council to provide certain amounts of information on this topic. I think that on our side of things, you will find that there is, as was our view when Mr. Sabia and Mr. Blanchard were here in asking with my colleagues across the way for some of this information. I think we found that there is some useful information that we can ensure that we receive from PCO on an ongoing basis. Mr. Chair, I'd like to take the first part of this, the remaining part of this motion, and I'd like to move an amendment. I'd like to, in the first section, Section A, replace the 15th day of each month with a quarterly basis. Second, I'd like to propose to delete from pursuant to the assessment tool to, quote, came into effect. I would like to add a subsection B to post the reports publicly on the committee's website.
So just so that I'm clear, Ms. Church.
Yep.
This is a new section B that you're proposing then? It's not a
Correct.
subsection, it's a new section, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
A, B, C. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, B.
So B was post the reports publicly on the committee's website. And C, invite the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner every quarter to discuss the contents of the most recent quarterly report from PCO. And if my colleagues are interested, I think that this would be a motion that reflects getting the information that we want on a timeline that is useful and appropriate, involves transparency of posting the reports that we receive publicly on our website as a committee, and that should we have questions or concerns about what is posted, we're providing for an invitation to the commissioner every quarter to discuss the contents of that quarterly report with us as well.
All right, we've got, by my count, 4 amendments to the motion, including 2 different sections, B and C. It's not substantive, but I think it does warrant suspension, just so that members of the committee are aware of what they're voting on. And Ms. Church, I'm going to ask that if you're able to share that with the clerk. I think the clerk has captured most of it, but if you're able to share that, I'm going to suspend for a few minutes until members are comfortable enough to understand what they're going to be voting on here and the changes. Are you ready? Monsieur Bonnet, est-ce qu'on peut...
Mr. Bonnet, should we suspend the meeting a few minutes? It's okay? You're okay with what Ms. Church just proposed as an amendment? Yes?
And I'm going to go to Mr. Hardy on the amendment, so I'm not going to suspend. Let's keep this going. Go ahead, Mr. Hardy.
Ça va être très, très rapide.
It'll be very quick. Once again, on our side, we decided to let this go and to support the amendment you had asked for. But you always have a second thought behind the first. What you're doing is changing this to your advantage and bring forth other amendments. And that's bad faith, frankly, because we've discussed what you've just proposed a long time ago. You withdrew it. I accepted it. I even voted in favor because we expected that it would be clear that we're going forward. And now all of a sudden you have new proposals to change things again. It's unfortunate because that's not cooperation. That's always pulling for what you want so that it's done your way. And that's exactly what you're doing and have been doing for 1 year, and that you're going to be doing more and more because you have the majority in committee. It's really unfortunate, but that's your proposal. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hardy.
En effet que je n'ai pas l'amendement en français, par contre.
Vous n'avez pas l'amendement en français?
Je ne sais pas s'il a été envoyé.
I do not have it in French. If it was sent to the clerk, we don't have the amendment in French, but if you want, I'll suspend for a few minutes. I imagine the Liberals were prepared to put forth their amendment.
Or is it only in English?
Yeah, I can send it over.
Was it shared with the clerk?
If you can send it to me.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to suspend for a couple of minutes.
Okay, I'd love to keep watching this, but I do got to go at this point. There's a couple things I got to take care of, and it is late for me, so I'll have to call it here. I'm assuming what's going to happen, though, is that amendment's going to go through, and then they'll get to a vote on the main motion, and we'll get the requested information. Yeah. Yeah, but we've already set in chat for tomorrow. We've got 11 a.m. We've got a lot of good committees on tomorrow. Really, really good stuff. 11 a.m., we're going to be watching PROC. We've got Stephen McKinnon in there, and they're talking about the Elections Canada Act. I'm assuming Pierre's going to be in the House tomorrow. Carney definitely won't show up, I don't think, because he is just getting back from his Europe trip, like today, like in a few hours, I believe. And then in the afternoon, we've got Ogo for an hour. We've got Lightbound in there. And then the second hour, we're going to watch Ministers Fraser and Anna Sagri in the Security Committee on Bill C-22. So I will leave it here, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in and watching. Bye, guys.